Keith Smith, Yahoo Sports NBA, joins us now on the Boardwalk on the hotline. Follow him on Twitter at Keith Smith NBA. We'll get into the Sixers coaching situation. I'll ask him the same question the texter asked me on the text board about the Sixers and Celtics as well. Also, we got a little flashback to a modernized version of 90s basketball, even for as ugly as it was. You know, Keith, I was saying to people, and I mentioned to you on off the air, I said that, I was telling people last night, people always want to know about what 90s basketball looked like. Well, you got to kind of have an idea what it looked like last night, because realistically, for as nostalgic as we all are about 90s basketball wasn't very pretty.
No, it wasn't at all. It was, ugly rock fights, and you had teams that purposely took 20 seconds of every shot clock to slow the game down because the talent gap just was so big between some teams to other teams. It's people wax nostalgic about those things and are, oh man, I wish we could go back to that. Well, after you watch that, nobody wants that again.
Right. But you know what? It was still a great game. It was still enjoyable. My favorite part, though, was I played the audio earlier on SportsCenter last night. Scott Van Pelt had to inform Jamal Murray that he was playing on Thursday. Apparently, Murray had no idea that he didn't have a couple days off, and he was visibly upset about it on live national television. So it seems like being in the bubble doesn't really help these guys' schedules even any better than the rest of us.
Yeah, the only thing it helps is they're not having to fly anywhere. They're not having to fly to Los Angeles or anything like that. At least they just, drove 5 minutes back to the hotel and then, were able to get to bed and rest today. I'm not sure. I'm guessing they practiced today, but it was probably more of a walkthrough, install some Clippers specific stuff that they hadn't really gotten into yet. And then we'll go. But that's, the nature of the playoffs. There's rarely, more than a day. Maybe every once in a while you get a couple days off. But, that's the benefit of wrapping up a series a little bit earlier like Dallas did. Or, like the Clippers did against Dallas.
Keith, I wanted to ask you some questions about the Sixers because obviously the story came out earlier today with Jay Wright pulling his name from consideration for the Sixers job. And I thought it was interesting. The verbiage he used was he said, the Sixers are an incredible opportunity for any coach to compete for a championship. And I think it's an interesting comment by Wright because, number one, he's a guy that a lot of people thought would eventually take Brett Brown's job, part of it because of his connections to the Colangelos through USA Basketball. Part of it is because there's a huge fan base in this area that love Jay Wright for winning the championships at Villanova and coaching the players that he has. So for him to pull his name out of there, I think opens the door to not maybe clog up the lane when it comes to interviews.
Yeah, it definitely does. Now, what I will say is I wouldn't look too much into the wording because I think Jay Wright is he's smart enough to know I'm not going to upset a whole bunch of people in Philadelphia by calling the 76ers anything but, a chance to compete for a championship. And the other thing I think is I still wonder if Jay Wright looks at the roster right now and says, now's not the time for me. His Villanova teams, they've never played overly big. Like Philadelphia is. They've always kind of been more perimeter-based and those kind of things with, around one or two good big men. So wouldn't surprise me if he's looking at it and saying, hey, let's talk again in a few years after you sort this stuff out, and we'll see where it goes from there. But, as far as the next coach goes, yeah, absolutely. What it may do now is there may be some guys who were waiting to really answer if they're interested or not based on, what is the what's kind of the deal there with Jay Wright, because no one wants to go in there and be an interview knowing Jay Wright's just going to take the job. So now that he's completely out, they may open up the interview pool just a little bit.
Now, with that being said, let's do a big picture on this end. So between Philadelphia, Brooklyn, Indiana, Chicago, and New Orleans, of those five teams, how would you rank what the best job is, considering the fact that Philadelphia has the constraints they have on money in the roster? Brooklyn is going to take a very special coach considering it's Kyrie and Durant. Pelicans are interesting because of their young talent. Same thing with Chicago. I'm not fully sure what to think of Indiana, honestly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say Brooklyn is the top job if you, as a coach, believe I can get those guys to do what they need to do. I can get them to buy in and listen, and not just Durant and Irving, but also Karis LeVert has now had a real taste of being the man. Spencer Dinwiddie has been the man there before. And then Jared Allen and DeAndre Jordan are, two guys who both want to start. So there's a lot of ego management involved in that job. And if you're a coach that believes I can get these guys to buy in and do this the way I think we need to, then that's the best job. Beyond that, I would say it's probably the Pelicans would be the next one, or Philadelphia. They're very, very close. Philly has the advantage of being in the East. They're still a good team. They're still a playoff team. I don't want to go too crazy with the fact that they didn't have the season that, folks hoped they would. Yeah, you've got some stuff to work around, but it's not like you're coming into a full rebuild. But the Pelicans, it's just that upside with those young players and Zion Williamson and all those things. And I think that's a very interesting job. Chicago, that's a place where I could really, as funny as it sounds, I could see Brett Brown landing and doing well with a young Bulls team and getting them competitive. And then I'm with you with Indiana. I think with Indiana, you look at it and say, good team. Well, you can win here. This is a team that's going to be in the playoff picture right away, but you've kind of got the looming Victor Oladipo situation to deal with fairly soon. So that's something you got to look at as well. But, those are all, they're pretty good jobs. None of those jobs screams like, oh man, I got to come in. This is a full tear down and I got to go, through some stuff here. They're all, pretty good teams or teams that are on their way up.
Two of the bigger names that have been mentioned for the Sixers opening are Ty Lue and Jason Kidd, two guys who are former head coaches who had very different situations before the end of their tenures. What are your thoughts on those two guys as potential candidates for the Sixers?
Yeah, I think Ty Lue is interesting because he's a guy who he has the respect of veteran players around the league. He's a championship level coach from his time in Cleveland. So as much as, people like to say, well, LeBron coached that team. Well, he's heavily involved, but he didn't coach the team. That was Ty Lue. So I think, that is something that becomes really interesting. There is, immediately comes in with kind of that gravitas. Now, Jason Kidd's a little bit different. Players still respect and remember Jason Kidd as an all-star player, but he's had some problems in his coaching tenure, both in Brooklyn and in Milwaukee, and he's probably going to get another chance eventually to figure this out. But I think if you're Jason Kidd, he's going to be cautious because I think he knows this might be kind of last chance saloon here. If it doesn't go well in whatever his next job is, that may be his last NBA job.
Of the other names that are floating around out there, whether it's Dave Yeager, whether it's Ime Udoka, I know there's a contingency of Sixers Twitter that is in love with Mark Jackson, which I don't fully understand. We know that Stan Van Gundy was kind of attempting to audition for the job on the TV broadcast. So, of the other names, does anybody stand out to you?
Yeah, I think if you could get either Stan Van Gundy or Jeff Van Gundy, you do really well to make those hires. I don't know, I don't know how much either one of them really wants to coach again, and is that what they want to do? But I think their style would really mesh well in Philadelphia. Just they're both personable with the media, so they'd be able to handle a tough media and fan base there. They'd be able to do quite well with that. I think they would also come in and be able to build a functional offense while adding to what's already a very good defense. So I'm interested there. Ime Udoka is a name. A lot of people like this guy. He's a former player. There's a lot of thought of he's kind of done his time in the Spurs system, and people love to poach those guys out of there under Pop. So that's an interesting one. Mark Jackson, I just stay away. I don't really like a lot of what Mark Jackson did in Golden State, and there were a lot of issues in his tenure there as the Warriors coach that came out after the fact that doesn't bode very well for any future. So that's one I'd probably stay away from.
So I'm going to play a little devil's advocate with you, and that is my problem with the Van Gundys is, number one, Jeff hasn't coached in 13 years? And I just have to wonder, is he really that interested in never coaching again, considering how comfortable he is with his media job? And my problem with Stan is that outside of the time with Orlando, I feel like his coaching tenure is a little overrated, honestly, because of the fact that there were a lot of reasons why he was let go in Miami. Things really went sideways in Orlando, and Detroit, aside from the one playoff appearance where he got steamrolled by LeBron, Detroit felt like it was a failed experiment.
Yeah, so what I would say on Jeff Van Gundy is you're absolutely right. I do wonder if the chance to, one of the things he has done well in his career with is when he has an all-star, all-NBA caliber big man, and he would have that in Joel Embiid. He had that with Patrick Ewing. He had that with Yao Ming. I wonder if that could be enough to draw him in to say, hey, I know how to build an offense around this kind of guy, and then a playmaking forward. He was, somebody who did a lot of that with Anthony Mason back in the day, and Ben Simmons, I think he's got some stuff he could pull out. Now, one thing I would worry about with Jeff Van Gundy, we started off talking about 90s basketball. It might get real ugly. I don't think you're going to play up and down and score a lot of points and very fun games to watch, but you might win, and that's what is important. Now, with Stan Van Gundy, the Miami situation is a little weird because Pat Riley clearly wanted to coach again. So that, I'm not going to worry too much about that part of it. Orlando, when it went south on Stan Van Gundy, was when Dwight Howard decided he wanted out. But Stan Van Gundy built kind of the modern 4-out offense around one big man. He was, one of the pioneers of that. That Orlando team that went to the NBA Finals shot a ton of three-pointers around Dwight Howard and his skill set. And I think, you could get him in a spot where he could build an offense that could do some similar things around Joel Embiid. How Ben Simmons fits in there, that part I don't fully know or see, but he's had some success with point guards who can't shoot in the past. So that'd be interesting to see, if he puts the ball back in his hands and how he makes that work. And then Detroit, the problem there was Stan Van Gundy was a bad GM. And if you're going to let the coach, in GM combo, we've seen over and over and over again, it doesn't work because you make short-sighted moves that are designed around winning right now, and that's the problem. So I think if he was focused on being just the coach again, you'd see him get back to doing some good things.
Keith Smith joining us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at Keith Smith NBA for all your NBA coverage. Keith, I got a question from on our text board a little bit earlier. I wanted to kind of address it with you as well because you're a guy who's covered the league for a while, been very in tune, especially with what's going on, not just around the league, but what's going on in Boston. And that is the texter felt that the Sixers rebuild was greatly inferior in its resulting product than the Celtics. And I felt that comment was unfair because I felt that the Celtics and Sixers had two completely different starting points for their rebuilds. And while I think where you need to give the Celtics credit is not as much their rebuild as the fact that their evaluations of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, I think, outdo the majority of the league because I remember how much criticism there was about Brown coming out of college. People were wondering if this guy could actually play in the NBA. And Tatum, people were wondering if he was being maybe drafted too high. So to me, I don't think it's that the Sixers rebuild was inferior compared to the Celtics. I think the Celtics and Sixers had completely different starting points.
Yeah, it's interesting. They kind of kicked them off right around the same time when you look at it. They kind of did similar things. What's interesting, though, is Boston rebuilt through Brooklyn. Danny Ainge read trades and continues to read his trades, quite well. And one of the things is that he read that Pierce and Garnett, I think he knew they were stuck together, with bubble gum and tape and all that stuff to, kind of hold that together for that last playoff run. So he read that right and knew, all right, Brooklyn's probably going to be really expensive, and then they might crater. And then as you got deeper into it, they rebuilt through that way, where Philly bottomed out and did it themselves. And that allowed Boston, though, they knew, well, we've got those Brooklyn picks sitting there. We can make other moves using our picks, our other guys, and rebuild out the roster. So I think what's different is Danny Ainge, continually, like you mentioned, he nailed the two big draft picks. He hit on, a lot of these guys that he's brought in from over in Europe, guys like Daniel Tice, Brad Wanamaker, Shane Larkin. Those guys have all been big. And then their free agent signings have generally been pretty good. The Kyrie Irving trade, didn't go exactly how they wanted it to, clearly. Gordon Hayward, unfortunately, has been hurt with that free agent signing. But other than that, there just haven't been any misses. And the one big thing, I think, where it gets tricky with Philly is that trade that they made together. That's where it gets really, together in that one. So that's, as you start to look at it, you can say, yeah, I kind of get it, here, and, how that one came together and why you would say Boston, won their rebuild while Philadelphia didn't. But I think it's just that you got to take a much bigger, wider view of the whole thing.
Also, the other thing I just thought of is that, you mentioned Danny Ainge's name about 3-4 times in that answer, Keith. How important is the fact that Danny Ainge has been the same GM there for what seems like forever, and the Sixers went from Hinkie to Colangelo to the collaborative triumphant to Elton Brand? There's something to be said for the fact that you're going through become a rebuild to a contender, but you've had multiple different visions in the front office.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The Celtics from ownership to front office to coaching staff are connected all the way through. They are on the same page with what they want to do. They're on the same page with the exact kind of players that they want, and they just go about doing it, and they all understand what their roles are. You hear Wick Grousbeck, the Celtics' primary owner. He will say all the time, my job is just to write the checks. And when Danny comes to me and says, I want to do this, I don't really question it. I trust his judgment. And Danny Ainge, kind of has that cachet because he built that title team around Pierce, Garnett, and Ray Allen. And then he very quickly, they only had one down year where they really bottomed out, and then they came back from it. And then a lot of criticism has been lumped at Danny Ainge over the years as a drafter. But if you look at it, that all came when Danny Ainge was regularly making picks in the 20s when the team was really good during the Garnett and Pierce years. And those picks, a lot of teams have trouble there. But what he does do well is he has a certain type of player that he identifies and he wants and he goes and gets. And, it's interesting to see they've got another lottery pick here, probably their last one for a while, by way of the Memphis Grizzlies. And there's a lot of names when you start looking at them. What I always look at with the Celtics is who had a super high profile coming into college and then really was kind of a messy fit in their college, for whatever reason. And then is that a guy Ainge is going to go after because he's done that time and time again, and it generally has worked out for the Celtics.
Keith Smith joining us here, as he does every Wednesday here on the Sports Bash Show on 97.3 ESPN. Follow him on Twitter at Keith Smith NBA for all your NBA coverage. Speaking of the NBA, Keith, I want to get your perspective on this warning from the NBA. They warned, this was from a couple days ago, they went out and warned teams that owners and senior basketball executives and their families must adhere to proper decorum. And then they followed up apparently today with a memo to teams stipulating similar restrictions for players, guests who were attending playoff games. I feel like I must have, did I miss something, Keith? Like, I never remember seeing anybody run on the court or anything. So this must be about them being able to hear people in the building, right? I mean, unless I'm overlooking something.
No, you didn't miss anything. There's a couple things that are working into this from my understanding from folks with teams and talking to folks within the league office as well. One is this is a standard now that's placed in arenas all over. Well, when you have fans in arenas, everybody's got those little placards on the back of the seats, especially the seats that are down close to the court that basically say, hey, don't act like an idiot while you're here. I'm really paraphrasing, summing it up, but that's more or less what it says. And what they're kind of doing is giving that message, but also, hey, remember here, you're one of about 50 people that are watching these games on the high end. So everything you scream and yell, we can hear. And then, that can get picked up on TV and those kind of things. And then it's just when you have owners and front office people, they can get overly excited, especially in the playoffs. These games are so brutal for them to watch. They really get run through the ringer because there's nothing they can do to help on the floor. So what you ultimately are kind of looking at there is, hey, let's just all act the right way as these games are going on, and let's not get too crazy out here because we're just trying to make sure we, get a good quality product here, and let's not get too nuts.
When you said that, the first thing I thought of was Steve Ballmer screaming. So, that guy is very excitable, but is there potentially another scenario? Because they mentioned today in the memo about families. obviously we all have these heartwarming moments we're seeing on Twitter of families reuniting and everything, but there is something to be said for the fact that, you're supposed to be in a bubble and you're all supposed to be kind of in it together, but you're also competitors. And we know there's a history of sometimes people's families, getting involved in some of these, tit for tats.
No, there absolutely is. And look at when you're in a regular arena, either the families are in kind of like a family section, where they're up away from the court. Sometimes they're in a box. They're never right there. Well, here these gyms aren't all that big, and I know you don't see it because of the way we're getting kind of that one consistent TV angle from one side. You're not seeing the other side, but it's not that big. They're pretty much right there. So what you're looking at that point is, how do you, really make that work? And and you don't need, a couple family members. It's almost like two moms at a youth game. Your kid fouled my baby, and then the next thing you know, they're throwing hands and spilling out of the stands. The NBA certainly doesn't need or want that. They don't need to turn it into what I see just about every weekend out on the soccer field with our daughter. Nobody needs to see that kind of nonsense. So that's I think there's that too. And then and you're absolutely right. More and more family are coming in. They're going. There were a lot of people saying, "Is this safe? Is it going to pop the bubble?" Well, the families are going through the 2-week quarantine. They're testing before they come, and then they test when they get there, and then they stay in quarantine for 2 weeks. So when you're starting to see these families rejoining the teams and the like, it's really big. And I've had a lot of players tell me, they'd kind of hit the point where they were 2 months into this, and they were feeling kind of down and ready to go. And now it was like, but now my family's here. I know I'm going to see them in just a few days, and it is giving these guys such a massive lift.
Just to follow up on that, and I'm not trying to erase anything that happened last week, but we've heard from multiple people who were in the bubble, from Chris Haynes to Malika Andrews, that the emotions of the players were so raw, and because of the emotions that were going on, that a lot of the things that happened with the stoppage of everything was a byproduct of that raw emotion. I mean, I'm not saying it would have solved everything, but is there something to be said for the fact that maybe if the families would have had arrived last Monday instead of this past Monday, that maybe things would have been a little different last week?
I think it would have been different for some players for sure. I think it was just a perfect storm. Guys let's talk about that first. They're hurting. They miss their families. They've been away from their loved ones for a very long time. And I know, people say, well, people in the military do this. Sometimes people go off to college. They do, but this is not anything an NBA player signed up to do. This was very unexpected, and yes, they could have opted out and all those things, but they didn't. They're there, and they're missing their families, and that's tough. And then on top of that, the vast majority of the players, they're just sick and tired of the continued, killing of people when there's no need for it. There's absolutely no reason for people of color to continue to be killed the way that they are. And when you add it all up together, like I said, it was that perfect storm, and it was bound to explode. And it did, but in a good, positive way that's hopefully going to result in real change. Here in Orlando, they just announced that the Amway Center, where the Orlando Magic plays, will be open as a polling location. For voting for folks, which is huge because, here in Florida, there's challenges with polling locations like there's a lot of places. So that's one positive immediate effect that's coming out of this, and hopefully there'll be many, many more.
That's interesting because I know the WWE Thunderdome is happening out of the Amway Center right now. So I wonder how they'll work around all the pyro.
So what they're doing, they're staying in the Arena Bowl. The voting will take place. There's a massive atrium.
Okay.
And, before you get in, so that's where the voting will take place. But what's really interesting is, while the Amway Center is owned by the city of Orlando and they can kind of do whatever they want, the Magic did partner with the Amway Center to do this. And what's really, kind of interesting and has some folks' eyebrows raised is one of the Magic's, the owner of the Magic family is the DeVos family, who's very heavily invested on the Republican side of things. So that did raise some eyebrows that, hey, well, maybe, they're seeing, regardless of however things go election-wise, there's a right and wrong way to do things. Let's be on the right side of doing things.
Well, let's hope for that. Always better to be on the side of right than on the side of politics, as far as I'm concerned. But what do I know? I'm just a sports talk guy. But he's Keith Smith. Follow on Twitter, Keith Smith NBA, Yahoo Sports. Great coverage on the NBA all year long. And of course, all guests he appear as he does every Wednesday on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Keith, always appreciate the time and the conversation.
Absolutely. Can't wait to talk to you next week. We'll be even deeper into the playoffs.